I heard the crack before I saw what happened. That sound of metal breaking apart. It's something you never forget once you've heard it in war. My grandson, Derek, was 3 feet ahead of me on the narrow hiking path, and suddenly he wasn't there anymore. Time does a strange thing when someone you love is in danger. Everything slows down, details become sharp and clear. I saw his hand reach out, fingers trying to grab onto nothing. I saw the dust puff up where his boots had been standing a second before. I saw the railing that should have kept him safe, was swinging loose, hanging over the cliff edge like a broken promise. I was moving before my brain finished understanding what happened. I'm 64 years old, and my body remembered things my mind had tried to forget. I dropped to my stomach and slid toward the edge, my hand shooting out into empty space. My fingers closed around fabric, his jacket, and I felt the full weight of him pull against my grip. The impact pushed my shoulder into the rocky ground, but I held on. Derek's face, white with fear, stared up at me from 20 feet below. He'd managed to catch himself on a narrow ledge, but I could see his feet sliding on loose rocks below him. The cliff dropped another 200 feet into a ravine filled with boulders. "Grandpa," he gasped, "don't let go." "Never," I said, and I meant it. That's when I heard the voice behind me, sweet, concerned, perfectly planned. "Oh my God, Thomas!" Derek's grandson's girlfriend, Melissa, rushed forward, her boyfriend, Marcus, right behind her. They'd been hiking behind us, taking photos of the fall colors in the Rocky Mountains. "What happened?" I looked up at them, and something in my gut, the same feeling that had kept me alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan, told me to be very careful about what I said next. "The railing broke," I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my arm hurt. Derek was 6 feet tall and solid muscle. I had him by the jacket, but I needed to pull him up onto that ledge he'd caught, get him safe before my old hands couldn't hold on anymore. "Marcus, I need you to grab my belt and hold me steady. I'm going to pull him up to that ledge." Marcus moved forward, but something about the way he moved was wrong. Too slow, too careful. He was looking at the broken railing, at me holding Derek, and I saw something flash across his face. It wasn't shock or worry. It was thinking. "Actually," Marcus said, stopping a few feet away, "maybe we should wait for help. You might make things worse if you're not trained in rescue situations." "I was a combat engineer for 23 years, I said firmly. "I've pulled wounded soldiers from worse places than this. Now grab my belt." "Marcus, help him!" Melissa's voice was high and scared, but when I glanced at Her eyes were locked on Marcus, not on Derek. They were telling each other something I couldn't quite understand. That's when I felt it, the fabric of Derek's jacket starting to tear from the weight. I didn't have time to play games with these two. Using a skill I'd learned in a mountain warfare course 30 years ago, I shifted my weight and pulled Derek up in one smooth motion. He scrambled, found places to hold on, and I guided him to a safer spot where he could press against the cliff face. "Okay, Derek, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You're going to move left about 6 feet. There's a crack in the rock face you can use to hold on. Work your way back to where the trail gets wider, where the railing is still safe." Derek's breathing came in short gasps, but he nodded. He'd been rock climbing since he was 12. He knew what to do. As he started to move, I pulled myself back from the edge and stood up, my shoulders screaming in pain. That's when I really looked at Melissa and Marcus. They were standing too far away. They hadn't moved to help. And Melissa was gripping Marcus's arm with very tight force, her face showing barely controlled panic. My mind worked fast, putting together things I'd been noticing for the past 3 days of this hiking trip. The way Marcus had suggested this particular trail, far away from people, difficult with several dangerous parts. The way Melissa had insisted Derek go first on the narrow parts. The life insurance policy Derek had mentioned casually over dinner 2 nights ago. The one Melissa had encouraged him to increase last month, naming her to get the money. And most damning of all, the way I'd seen Marcus looking at that railing early this morning when he thought I was still in my tent. I'd watched him through the mesh window, thinking he was just being careful. But now I understood. He'd been checking his work. Derek made it back to safe ground, his chest heaving. He looked at me with something like awe. "Grandpa, you saved my life!" "That's what family does," I said. Then I turned to face Melissa and Marcus. Funny thing about that railing, I checked every part of this trail when we started up this morning. Old habit from my engineering days. That railing was solid. Marcus's face didn't change, but Melissa's did. Just for a second, fear flashed across her face. "Well, it obviously wasn't solid," Marcus said smoothly. "These mountain trails, maintenance isn't always good. Derek's lucky you have fast reflexes, Thomas." "Luck had nothing to do with it," I said quietly. "Training, maybe. Being prepared, definitely. You know what else I learned in the military? How to recognize a dangerous situation, how to read an enemy's movements." "Enemy?" Melissa laughed, but it sounded forced. "Thomas, you're in shock. We should get Derek down the mountain. Get him down." Checked out. "That's actually a good idea," I said. "But first, Marcus, I need to ask you something. Why were you looking at that railing this morning around 6 a.m., before the sun was fully up?" Marcus went very still. Derek looked between us, confused. "What are you talking about?" Derek asked. "I'm talking about the fact that someone loosened the bolts on that railing," I said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "Someone who knew we'd be passing this way, knew Derek would be in front. Someone who knew that if Derek went over the edge on this particular part, help would be hours away. Someone who would gain something from Derek's death." "That's crazy," Melissa said, but her voice cracked. "Derek, your grandfather is standing right here," I interrupted, with eyes that still work fine. "And I saw what I saw, Marcus." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whistling through the pine trees and Derek's heavy breathing. Then Marcus's face changed. The helpful concern melted away, replaced by something cold and calculating. He looked at Melissa, then back at me. "You're a smart old man," he said. "Too smart for your own good." Everything happened fast after that. Marcus jumped forward, but his goal wasn't me. It was Derek, still shaken from his close call with death. But I'd spent 23 years training for exactly this kind of moment. My body moved on instinct, stepping between them. Marcus was 30 years younger and built like someone who spent a lot of time at the gym, but I had been in actual combat. There's a difference between looking strong and being dangerous. I caught his wrist, twisted, and used his own speed to send him stumbling past me. He crashed into the very railing he'd broken, and it gave way completely. For one scary moment, I thought he'd go over, but he caught himself on the rock face, just as Derek had, except I had no plan to save him. "Grandpa, what the heck?" Derek was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "Melissa," I said, not taking my eyes off Marcus as he struggled to pull himself back up, "you're going to want to start talking, because trying to murder someone carries a big punishment in Canada, and right now, you're looking at being part of it." Her face fell apart. "I didn't want to. Marcus said it would be quick, that Derek wouldn't suffer. He said we could be together, that we'd have the insurance money to start over. He said—" "Shut up!" Marcus yelled from his dangerous position, but he was too busy trying not to fall to stop her. "He planned it all," Melissa sobbed. "The trail, the timing, he said you were old, that you wouldn't notice. But when you grabbed Derek, when you saved him, I realized—" She looked at me with something like horror. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who taught his grandson to always check his equipment, to always have a backup plan, and to never, ever trust someone who tries to separate you from the people who love you," I said. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, not to make a call, but to stop the recording I'd started, the moment I felt something was wrong. I'm also someone who learned a long time ago to always gather proof. Derek's eyes widened. "You recorded everything? From the moment your girlfriend started acting strange?" I confirmed. "And before you ask, yes, I had my suspicions. I didn't want to believe them. I hoped I was wrong. But when I saw Marcus checking that railing this morning, I knew I had to be prepared." Marcus finally pulled himself back onto solid ground. He lay there, breathing hard, looking between me and his phone, which I'd already kicked away from him. "You're not going to get away with this," he gasped. "I already have," I said calmly. I pulled out a second device from my pocket, an emergency GPS beacon, military grade, something I'd carried on every mission and every hike since I retired. I turned this on 20 minutes ago, right after Derek went over the edge. Search and rescue is probably 15 minutes away, along with the police. They'll be very interested in hearing this recording and in looking at that railing for tool marks. The color left Marcus's face. Melissa was openly crying now. Derek walked over to stand beside me, still trying to understand everything. The insurance policy. You knew about that? You mentioned it at dinner. It seemed odd that Melissa was so interested in you increasing it, naming her to get all the money. You've only been together 6 months. I looked at my grandson with something between disappointment and understanding. But I didn't want to get involved in your relationship. I thought maybe I was being too worried. Old man seeing ghosts in every shadow. You weren't too worried, Derek said quietly. You were right. We heard the helicopter before we saw it, the distinctive sound of rotor blades echoing off the mountain peaks. Search and rescue, followed by a second helicopter carrying police officers. They'd taken my emergency signal seriously. As the helicopters landed in a clearing 50 meters down the trail, I put my hand on Derek's shoulder. There's something you need to understand. This isn't just about them being caught and you being safe. This is about the choices we make, about who we trust and why. Derek nodded, his jaw tight. You're a good young man, I continued. Smart, kind, successful. Those are things that attract the right kind of people, but they also attract predators, people who see you as a target, an opportunity. Melissa wasn't looking for love. She was looking for money. How do you know? Derek asked. How do you spot people like that? Experience, mostly, and paying attention to things that don't make sense. The way she pushed you to increase that policy but never wanted to talk about long-term plans. The way she kept you away from your friends, made excuses whenever you wanted to introduce her to family. The way Marcus showed up at just the right time to support her. I paused. But most of all, I trusted my gut feelings. Something felt wrong, even when I couldn't figure out exactly what. The police officers were climbing up toward us now, with search and rescue medics close behind. I almost died today, Derek said, his voice hollow. But you didn't. You're alive because you kept your head, because you've been training for years in rock climbing, and because I was there to help. I squeezed his shoulder. The person you need to be angriest at isn't them. It's yourself for ignoring the warning signs. He looked at me sharply. That's harsh, Grandpa. It's true. Melissa was showing you who she was. You just didn't want to see it. None of us want to believe that someone we care about would hurt us. But the world has dangerous people in it, Derek. People who smile while planning to destroy you. The lesson here isn't to become worried and trust no one. It's to pay attention, to listen when something feels off, to value the people who've been in your corner for years over someone who showed up 6 months ago promising everything you ever wanted. The officers reached us and everything became official. Statements were taken, evidence was collected. Marcus and Melissa were read their rights and taken into custody. Marcus on attempted murder charges, Melissa as part of the plan and helping him. The recording I'd made was handed over along with my story about the broken railing. Derek was checked over by the medics. Bumps and bruises, some scrapes, minor shock, but otherwise unharmed. They wanted to take him down in the helicopter, but he refused. I'm walking down with my grandfather, he said firmly. So we did. We took the long trail down, the safe trail, with 2 police officers walking with us as witnesses and protection. It was almost sunset by the time we reached the bottom. During that walk, Derek was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Did you really suspect something from the beginning?" "Not from the very beginning," I admitted, "but once she started pushing for changes to your life, the insurance, moving away from your friends, limiting your contact with family, that's when alarm bells started ringing. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to believe you'd found someone good, but I also knew I needed to watch carefully. That's why you insisted on coming on this trip." "That's why I insisted on coming on this trip," I confirmed, "and why I stayed sober when Marcus was encouraging everyone to drink a lot last night, why I got up early to check the trail, why I kept my phone recording in my pocket." "You're like some kind of spy," Derek said with a weak laugh. "I'm a grandfather who loves his grandson," I corrected, "who spent enough years in dangerous situations to recognize the signs, who knows that the worst threats often come from people who smile and pretend to love you." We walked in silence for a while longer. Then Derek said, "Teach me." "Teach you what?" "How to see it, how to protect myself, how to be more like you." I stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, making him look older than his 31 years. "You don't need to be like me," I said gently. "You need to be yourself, but wiser, more careful, less willing to ignore your gut feelings just because you want something to be true." I paused. The military taught me a lot about survival, about understanding situations and people. But the most important lesson wasn't about fighting. It was this: trust is earned over time, not given freely to anyone who asks for it. Real love is patient. Real relationships can handle being looked at closely. If someone is rushing you, keeping you away from others, asking you to make big decisions quickly, that's a warning sign the size of a billboard. Derek nodded slowly. "I feel so stupid." Don't. Predators are good at what they do. They've practiced. They know how to find weak spots and use them. Melissa knew you were lonely after your last relationship ended. She knew you wanted to believe in love again. She used that against you. I started walking again, and Derek walked beside me. The question isn't why you didn't see it. The question is what you'll do differently next time. "Next time," Derek repeated, like the words tasted bitter. "I don't know if there should be a next time." "There should be," I said firmly. "There are good people out there, Derek. People who will love you for who you are, not what you can give them. Your grandmother, my late wife, she was one of those people. She taught me what real partnership looks like. Equal sacrifice, mutual respect, and love that doesn't come with rules or price tags." "I miss Grandma," Derek said quietly. "I do too, every day. But she'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. Don't let one bad person make you distrust everyone. Let this experience make you wiser, not harder." By the time we reached the parking area, it was dark. News crews were there. Word had spread about the attempted murder on the mountain trail. Derek's mother, my daughter Sarah, was there too. She'd driven 4 hours from Edmonton the moment she'd heard. She grabbed Derek in a tight hug, then turned to me. "Dad, they said you saved his life." "I did what needed doing," I said simply. "He did more than that," Derek said, his voice stronger now. "He protected me when I wouldn't protect myself. He saw what I couldn't see." Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I said. "Just help him learn from this. We all need to be more careful about who we let into our inner circles, more willing to ask hard questions, more ready to walk away when something doesn't feel right." The criminal trial took place 8 months later. By then, investigators had uncovered the full extent of Marcus and Melissa's plan. Marcus had a history, 2 previous relationships that had ended with suspicious accidents, though nothing could be proven. Melissa had debts she'd hidden from Derek, over $60,000 worth. Together, they'd planned to collect Derek's $300,000 life insurance policy, split it, and disappear. The recording I'd made was played in court. Melissa's breakdown on the mountain, admitting to the plan. Marcus's cold thinking when he jumped toward Derek. The jury talked for less than 4 hours. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder. Melissa received 15 years as part of the plan and helping him. Derek's victim impact statement was powerful. He talked about trust, about love, about how it felt to have someone you care about try to kill you for money. After the sentencing, reporters asked me how I'd known something was wrong. I told them the truth. Decades of training, years of experience, and a grandfather's love that made me pay attention when something felt off. But here's what I didn't tell them. What I saved for Derek during a quiet dinner after the trial ended. "The world has always been dangerous," I said, cutting into my steak. "There have always been people willing to hurt others for money. But there have also always been people willing to stand between the predators and their intended victims. That's what family is for. That's what love does. Real love. It protects. It warns. It acts." "You make it sound like everyone needs a military-trained grandfather watching their back," Derek said with a small smile. He'd been in therapy for months, working through the trauma and the betrayal. He was getting better, stronger, but the scars were still fresh. "No," I said. Everyone needs someone who loves them enough to tell them hard truths, someone who won't stay quiet when they see danger, someone who will act when action is needed. I set down my fork and looked at him directly. But mostly, everyone needs to be that person for themselves, to trust their own gut feelings, to value their own safety over someone else's approval, to remember that real love never asks you to be less careful, less protected, or less valued. Derek was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I met someone." My eyebrows rose. "Oh?" "She's a teacher. We met at a community center where I volunteer. We've been taking it slow. Very slow. And Grandpa." He looked at me with something like hope mixed with fear. "I'd like you to meet her, to tell me if you see any red flags." I felt something warm grow in my chest, not because he wanted my approval, but because he was asking the right questions, being careful, valuing his own safety enough to ask for a second opinion. "I'd be honored," I said, "but Derek, in the end, you need to trust yourself. I can tell you what I see, but you're the one who has to make the choice." "I know," he said, "but it helps to have backup, to have someone watching who knows what to look for." "Always," I promised. "That's what family does." Now, 2 years later, Derek is engaged to that teacher, Amanda, a woman with a kind heart and a sharp mind, who loves Derek for who he is, not what he can provide. I've watched their relationship grow with the careful eye of someone who knows what to look for, and I've seen nothing but real care, equal partnership, and mutual respect. Marcus is still in prison. Melissa was released last month on parole and moved to Ontario. Derek's insurance policy has been canceled. He decided he didn't need one until he had children to provide for. He's happy, careful, and wiser than he was. As for me, I'm still the same old man who wakes up early, pays attention to details, and trusts his gut feelings. But I'm also a grandfather who sleeps better at night knowing his grandson learned the most important lesson I could teach him. Being safe isn't being too worried. Being careful isn't weakness. And love, real love, never asks you to make yourself open to danger. The mountains are still there, beautiful and dangerous. Derek still hikes them. But now he checks every piece of equipment twice. He pays attention to who suggests which trails and why. He trusts, but he checks. That's all any of us can do. Stay alert, trust our gut feelings, protect the people we love, and remember that sometimes the most important skills have nothing to do with fighting or planning. Sometimes survival is as simple as paying attention, asking questions, and being willing to act when you see someone you love walking toward danger. I taught Derek to be careful. The mountain taught him why that matters. And together, we made sure he survived to learn both lessons. That's what family does. That's what love means. And that's a truth worth more than any insurance policy, any amount of money, or any false promise of safety from someone who smiles while planning your destruction. Stay alert, trust wisely, love carefully, and always, always listen when someone who truly loves you says something doesn't feel right, because sometimes that warning is the only thing standing between you and a 2,000-foot drop into darkness on a